In reflecting on my journey through this subject, I have taken into account the content of the learning materials presented and the impact they had on my personal and professional development as a trauma-informed practitioner. Being trauma-informed means to accept the fact that as humans, we have instinctual, unconscious mechanisms that can influence our decisions and actions. What this means is that behavioral issues, alcohol and drug abuse, and violent behavior cannot always be labeled as mental illness or bad character. Those behaviors can arise as coded unconscious patterns of survival. Trauma-informed practice follows the principle that all people matter, all persons belong. A trauma-informed practitioner creates a sense of safety, empowers clients, and works towards healing. Although there are a myriad of papers published on the topic of trauma, creating a broadly accepted, all-encompassing definition has proven to be remarkably difficult. Why is this the case? As described by Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the stresses that trigger traumatic experiences can vary from life-threatening events through experiences of loss to cultural and systemic oppression. Trauma can be caused by a single or multiple events that have an accumulative power. It can develop in response to a chronic condition, such as prolonged exposure to witnessing violence, of being neglected during childhood. Trauma can affect individuals, communities, and even occur across generations. The multidisciplinary nature of scientific inquiries into trauma has contributed to a lack of coherency in accepted terminology. Terms such as existential and emotional trauma were coined by separate disciplines within the humanities. Descriptions of trauma are oftentimes symbolic and derived from theories of the unconsciousness. Another popular approach to understanding trauma comes from neuropsychobiological field. In his book, The Body Keeps the Score, psychiatrist, researcher, author and educator Bessel van der Kolk traces the changes that occurred in certain parts of the brain following trauma. He looks at ways to rewire the brain and how to unlock areas that were blocked as part of a survival response to a traumatic experience. As van der Kolk states, the challenge of recovery is to re-establish ownership of your own body and your mind, of yourself. The polyvagal theory considers how traumatic experiences dysregulates the automatic nervous system. This system works without the conscious input of the trauma survivor. Relearning how to observe bodily reactions is central to the healing process. Here, we encounter yet another important determinant of trauma, subjectivity. It is built into the experience. As Atkinson quotes after Schweitzer, the individual's experiential world is private and experienced by him or her alone. It is not observable and cannot be quantified and observed by another in the same way as a chemical reaction might, for instance, be observed. All the above-mentioned variables of encoding and experiencing trauma can lead to questions about the validity of the general theory of trauma. It is often stated that there was no word for suicide in Australia's indigenous languages. It is a concept created in a meeting of two cultures. In some respects, the word trauma has the same power as the word suicide. It imposes a certain worldview deriving from the disease-focused mentality. It is also a concept that can be helpful in describing certain phenomena. This concept cannot, however, become a replacement for cultural protocols that carry knowledge about how to raise children, how to process grief or accept illness. I would go so far as to say that the concept of trauma applied for First Nations people might actually be an erroneous interpretation of issues, too complex to be neatly categorized by an umbrella term familiar to specific problems faced exclusively by the invading culture. It's almost like using the English language to disguise or mask a different problem which, according to historical records, did not exist prior the settlement. I try to imagine what type of society is organized and can operate in such a way as to make the concept of trauma redundant. What could we learn from such a society? Would we even have the ability to understand if the knowledge was available to us? Humans are animals that believe the stories they tell themselves. Humans are credulous animals. Not long ago, the world was immersed in a narrative that was so well distributed that it became a global phenomenon. A narrative that explained the death of millions of people and affected many with a sense of fear and powerlessness. Humanity did not expect this. We were unprepared to deal with it, and there was literally nothing we could do as a collective to stop it. This is the story of the pandemic as presented by the mainstream in Australia. This is the story that inflicts the experience of trauma on everyone who follow its narrative. Living in the most lockdown city in the world and seeing the effects of the tyrannical government policies on my community prompted me to study creative art therapy. I sensed that trauma-informed practice will be an essential skill in the years ahead. I longed to understand what happened to the people around me throughout the last couple of years. Why did my neighbor's young child, otherwise healthy, develop a nervous tic? Now, I have come to understand it is an unconscious response to prolonged stressors. My neighbor on the other side is a yoga therapist and survivor of domestic violence. She was diagnosed with pericarditis following her second shot of vaccine that she was forced to take to retain her job. The choices she was forced to make because of overbearing government policies indirectly impacted her mental health and ability to work. I have understood that people can be re-traumatized by systemic pressures. A third neighbor suffered from bipolar and severe depression before pandemic. These days, he doesn't leave his room. We haven't seen him for many months. The experience of mass trauma can be felt in Melbourne. People in my neighborhood have been affected by a sense of alienation. The experience of the absolutisms of everyday life was shattered, leaving one without a sense of security, safety, continuity, protection, etc. The shattering of those confronting absolutisms of everyday life is the source of estrangement. Our backyard is a native bushland, gateway to gorge. It is a welcoming space for all community. I recognize it as a part of a sacred geography of Australia. It is a healing space that I connect with. Here is where I invite my friends and neighbors for a yarn and a cup of coffee in the presence of country. In current circumstances, trauma awareness is an essential skill for all people to obtain. This can allow for the community to grieve and heal. At the moment, there are no groups meeting in safe spaces that allow sharing traumatic experiences triggered by pandemic. What's more, the existence of such groups is not socially acceptable in the current political climate. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report in 2020, 75% of Australians had experienced trauma in 2009, well over 1 decade ago. The report also precautiously adds the long-term effects of COVID-19 pandemic are still unknown, and there could be longer-term negative impacts. I can see them all around me. The Australian government recognises that trauma is prevalent. Health organisations that are dealing with trauma-impacted communities use it as a gateway to obtain lucrative grants. I'm aware this process has been happening for decades amongst outsourced community organisations working within First Peoples communities. I suspect not much has changed in that time. We can still observe shocking statistics surrounding birth mortality, life expectancy, incarceration rates, the prevalence of domestic violence and child abuse in some communities. This situation makes me think that systemic and cultural oppression has not stopped. The response to the widening wound is just a temporary band-aid. It seemingly allows problems to be dealt with till the next election. Community organizations are forced to fight for another grant to continue their work after establishing relationships with communities. Healing is not a matter of writing and winning consecutive 3-year grants. The quote from Atkinson's book describes it well. Although collective trauma does not have the same acute impact normally associated with trauma, it has distinct and in many cases longer-lasting repercussions. It seeps slowly and insidiously into the fabric and soul of relations and beliefs of people as community. The shock of loss of self and community comes gradually. People, feeling bereaved, grieve for their loss of cultural surrounds, as well as for family and friends. Feeling victimized, the same people may also carry a deep rage at what has happened to them, but may be unable to express their anger. I belong to a homeschooling community. Most of my close relationships are other homeschooling families who are either immigrants or first and second generation Australians. It seems that the best way to heal community should come from within one's own community. I feel that it is my responsibility to support the mental health of members of our community. The Australian government expresses the need to heal trauma in order to prevent post-traumatic stress disorders and to reduce stresses that can lead to re-traumatizing. One of the proposed preventative measures is to target individuals at high risk of developing PTSD. Like victims of the domestic violence, people with the pre-existing mental health problems, immigrants or refugees. This individualistic approach doesn't take into consideration the cultural context of trauma survivors. Some people have a collective understanding of self, which has to be reflective in the healing process. Some people believe that physical conditions are merely the representation of illness of their soul or spirit. Faith Parks, in her TEDx talk, suggests our behavior rises to the expectations of our beliefs. These realizations should be an invitation for a patient to take agency over their own healing and be an equal counterpart in the process. The power structures of the educational and health-related institutions impact the accessibility of the services and the healing process. The Australian government recognises the psychosocial or somatic approaches to healing trauma, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, relaxation, meditation, and yoga. I have been practicing yoga since primary school. It has accompanied me throughout my whole life as a means of maintaining a healthy body and mind. In my home country, I worked as a Polish language teacher and earned money from my ability to speak and write professionally. Coming to Australia has completely stripped me from this identity. What stayed was my yoga practice, which evolved into a decision to start a yoga teacher training program. Currently, I am on the path to be a registered yoga teacher. Thanks to Creative Art Therapy course, I have made a decision to lead yoga classes as a trauma-informed yoga practitioner. The current trend in ever-popular fitness-oriented model of yoga practice coexists with yoga as a healing modality. The therapeutic approach to yoga traditionally incorporates knowledge from ancient Ayurveda. In recent times, yoga therapy had found its way into trauma recovery programs. It is scientifically proven that yoga enables traumatized people to learn how to comfortably inhabit their tortured bodies. Yoga that is led with the intention and clear aim of healing brings back a sense of being fully sensually alive. Incorporating breathing exercises, oftentimes referred to as pranayama, yoga positions, asanas, and meditation brings awareness to the otherwise unconscious bodily reactions. The connection between psychophysiology of trauma and yoga is recognized by health professionals. My yoga practice is a healing practice. The word yoga from Sanskrit means yoke and unite. Yoga means to become one, to integrate. Judy Atkinson, in her analysis of indigenous healing practices, bases her book on the idea of healing as a return to wholeness. Healing, from the Old English word Helena, means returning to wholeness. Throughout my journey of learning about trauma-informed practice during this unit, my experience of yoga has been enriched with the necessity to connect with my own ancestors and recognizing their tragic history. My grandfather's brother died in Auschwitz-Birkenau. The experiences of war and changes in political paradigm, communism, fascism, and capitalist democracy have impacted my entire family to a great extent. I have also discovered that this is just a part of my ancestral connection. Every time I practice yoga, I also reconnect with the place I am standing on. I reconnect with Wurundjeri country and its powerful energy. I am aware of the importance of creating safe spaces for healing rituals to take place, and the practice of Dadiri, unconditional listening. Drawing strength from my ancestors and Nam, the place I have chosen to live with my family, has made me into a strong and resilient person, able to share my practice with others with the aim of healing. In this sense, I too become a part of the dreaming. Atkinson writes, dreaming is not something that happened in the long distant past. Dreamings are the processes of human action in co-creation with the great creators and the ancestral beings, which continue in the present, in continuing birth, life, death, rebirth, renewal, that is human activity across millennia. I love the words of Uncle Paul Gordon. In 1788, some of the forgotten children came back. Those words are unifying. We who came to Australia are the forgotten children. In this perspective, we can understand that we will have a place here. Even the colonizers, the oppressors, the pound British, even me, we all belong. I was delighted that professional accreditation body of Yoga Australia recognized the need to connect with Indigenous wisdom. With the help of the culturally informed trauma practitioner and the Indigenous yoga teacher, Jem Stone, a reconciliation action plan is currently being developed. Thank you.